Hello, beautiful. I am so excited to introduce you to our special guest for today. While I don't want kids personally, I love being an aunt. And many of you who listen are moms or aunts, or maybe you have younger cousins or siblings. Today's guest is Molly Forbes, the founder and executive director of the Body Happy organization. The Body Happy organization helps children and young people celebrate, respect, and accept all bodies, especially their own. And what I especially love is that they don't want to just put out the fires of poor body image. They want to stop them from even happening in the first place, which is like, yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. So I cannot wait to dive in. Welcome, Molly, to Your Body Is Not the Problem podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this conversation.
Same here. To start, can you tell us a bit more about you, please, and your body image journey?
Yeah, sure. So I'm 41 for context. I grew up in the UK, it's where I live, and I'm a mum. I've got two daughters who are aged 10 and 14. And so I grew up when I was kind of a teenager, it was the 90s. So that was kind of my like real period of influence. So I was growing up with, we didn't have social media, but we had magazines. It was like Kate Moss, Paris Hilton were like the kind of, like early noughties, late 90s kind of idols that we were kind of taught to look up to. And I think that I was really lucky in that my parents were both teachers. They worked in secondary schools. And so they were and my mum was like definitely a sort of like second wave feminist. So she was quite kind of, aware of, appearance ideals, and they didn't really talk about dieting. And I remember like as a kid, I wasn't allowed a Barbie because my mum felt that they were like too unrealistic, like body standards. So I had a Cindy doll instead of a Barbie. So I think like in many respects, my parents were quite aware of this stuff. However, growing up in the culture that I grew up in, and being aware of all the messages around me about bodies in like popular culture and at school and things that I was hearing from maybe extended relatives, I definitely learned by the time I was, in my teens, late teens, that there was a good way to have a body and there was a bad way to have a body, and that I needed to be vigilant for my body and make sure that my body kind of fit that good, quote unquote, view of a body. And so I definitely picked up some like problematic ideas and started engaging with, I look back at my late teens, early 20s, and right through to my like mid to late 20s, actually, when I became a mum. Some of the things that I was engaging in and the behaviors that I was engaging in, I told myself were about health, but they weren't. It was about having a smaller body and wanting to look a certain way. And actually some of those behaviors were really super like unhealthy when I look back on them now. And I think it was really becoming a mum and being aware of not wanting to perpetuate this cycle, and really challenging why I was doing certain things and not wanting to role model certain behaviors that really made me start to become aware of this stuff. And I started campaigning on it. And I think that initially I was very much coming at it from a like almost a selfish place. Like I'd had to unlearn a lot of these ideas and was starting to feel better in my own body and more at peace and comfortable in my own body, and wanting to raise daughters who didn't have to unlearn this stuff. Um, rather than coming at it from like a social justice angle and wanting to like raise good human beings and wanting to like create an equitable environment for all bodies, like that initially wasn't my framework to come at through, because I was still learning about things like body privilege, right? I didn't really understand, or it wasn't I didn't understand, I wasn't even aware really. And I would say that that is the framework that I sit in now. I've kind of, I want really care really deeply about how children and young people feel in their own bodies, but I care equally deeply about how they treat other children and young people whose bodies don't look or function like their own. And that is something that it's taken me 41 years to kind of get to this place where I feel like that in my own body, and in the kind of my awareness of how society treats people in marginalized bodies, and having an awareness of not of how other people have experienced the world in bodies that aren't like my own. Yeah, so that's kind of brought me to that's really brought me to where I am today.
Well, first, fascinating that you weren't allowed Barbies. And I'm curious to know, was that something that you also then had for your daughters? Like, did you allow them to have Barbies?
Yeah, so my youngest daughter loved Barbies. Like she's kind of outgrown them now. She's 10. But she had Barbies, but I think the rate, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on Barbies, couldn't we? Much to say about Barbies. And in my first book I wrote, when I wrote a chapter about toys, and I wrote about Barbie in that chapter. Um, so I would say I'm of the mindset where when we ban something, it can make it even more attractive. So, like if you think about food, for example, the way that often society talks and thinks about food with young people. Oh no, you're not allowed the sweets, you're not allowed the cake. And all the evidence shows that as soon as you start using moral language around food and using value judgments like that around food, and starting to say that one food is good and one food is bad, you can actually just the very food that you might want your kids to eat less of. And I'm saying this, I'm I don't prescribe to that kind of idea that there are good and bad foods, but I know that many of the people, when I'm running training, the foods that they want, like the teachers, the foods that they want the kids in their school to eat, for example, are they want them to eat more vegetables, they want them to eat more fruit. And we know that, like, when they start talking about sugar as being bad, or cake as being bad, and sweets as being bad, and apples or lettuce or whatever as being good, actually, all you do is make that food that you're calling bad, again with the air quotes, you make it more attractive. And I think that the same is true for like many different types of toys, phones, social media, like all of these things. I think that actually the trick is in trying to give kids the skills to use them in think critically about them. So my youngest daughter did have Barbies. Yeah, different from me because I always really wanted Barbies. I wasn't allowed them, but I wanted them. Um, and so my younger daughter did have them, but she did have, I guess, the differences between the era that she's growing up in compared to like 30 years ago when I was her age. Actually, the kind of Barbies that were on offer were very different. So we've got a wider range of Barbies now. There's more body diversity. I mean, there is still a lot that needs to be done. We're definitely not there yet, but that diversity exists to some extent, and it wasn't something that existed when I was growing up her age. Um, and I've always been really mindful about how I talk about things with my kids, and having open conversations and trying to encourage that critical thinking. So I wouldn't just like give them a toy and just like, no conversation around it.
Very interesting. And that's something that I would never have thought to associate, like the if you tell them they can't have it, then they'll want it more. I've always thought about that in terms of like food and stuff like that, but I hadn't thought of that in terms of toys. So that's very interesting. The other thing that you mentioned was how a lot of us can disguise what we're doing as, oh, I'm trying to be healthy. I did that for years, and I did some crazy stuff to my body, and I suffered the consequences. What should a parent or loved one do if their young teenager or child comes up to them and says, I want to be healthy, or I want to go on a diet?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it's about like really interrogating those two things. So, what do you mean by healthy? What does healthy mean to you? And then it's about helping them separate like health from weight. So, the most easy, like, kind of thing to remember within that is that health isn't a look. You can't tell how healthy someone is just by looking at them. And health is really super complicated. And so, if you're saying, I want to be healthy, what do you mean by that? Do you mean you want to engage in more healthy behaviors? You want to do more things that are good for your mind and your body? Okay, so what does that mean for you? often when people say I want to be healthy, what they are saying, it's coded talk for diet culture, and they're saying I want to cut out certain foods. I want to change the way I'm eating. I want to do more exercise. And it's like very much focused on like nutrition and movement. But actually, if we're thinking about healthy behaviors, which form only one part of our overall health and well-being, those behaviors should also include lots of other things. So it's talking to your kids about all the different ways that we can engage in healthy behaviors that actually about how we feel, not about how we look. So, are we making sure we're having enough sleep? How much time are we spending on screens? Are we brushing our teeth? Are we, teens and young people, like, are you vaping? Are you smoking? Are you experimenting with alcohol? Like all of those things are, unhealthy behaviors and or health risking behaviors. Like all of those kind of behaviors encompass that piece of the pie. Um, so I think it's about expanding what we mean by health and healthy behaviors. So we're not just talking about nutrition and movement, and just the kind of giving children, young people, an opportunity to get curious about those things. And I would say that probably starts with role modeling and the way that we talk about it ourselves as adults, because children definitely here in the UK, if they're learning about health at school, they're learning about we call it's called on the curriculum, it's called healthy eating. So if they're learning about these things, they are learning it through a very specific prism that is probably not through a lens of positive body image and eating disorder prevention. And that's what my work is all about, trying to undo some of that stuff and help teachers teach these aspects of the curriculum in a safe way. But I think that we have to be aware that teachers are the products of the culture just as much as parents are, as just as much as we all are. So yeah, I think that it's about kind of giving our kids an opportunity to think, well, what do you mean by that? Just get curious. Okay, that's interesting. Tell me what you mean by that, and then having a conversation about it.
Yeah, I know that when I first started like my health and fitness journey, I say health because again, I was not doing healthy things. When I look back on that, I just wish that someone had asked me why. Like why was I setting those goals? And to just dig a little deeper because now when I have like proof of what my goals were back in like 2016, I'm like, "Oh my gosh." But I think especially when we're in like grade 5, 6, 7, that's like the age where we start comparing our bodies to others. And that's where it's like, oh, like, how can I make my body look more like theirs? And do you have any tips for helping them to not fall into that comparison trap?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, isn't it? I think there's so much to say on that. I think that for children and young people, particularly as they're starting to go through adolescence, I think there are two big things to bear in mind, okay, that are like a caveat to this, to any parents who are listening. Like the first thing is I would say it's very normal and arguably age appropriate behavior for children to start to care more about what their peers think of them and how they present in the world. That is like completely normal. One of the kind of jobs, so to speak, of being a teenager is working out who you are and working out your identity and working out what do you like and how do I want to present myself in the world? How do I want to show up in the world? And for a lot of young people, that can look like, well, I want to be like my friends. I've got this, I have this group of peers that I feel safe in. This is my tribe. This is like part of my identity now. This is like who I am. And so, this is how we dress, and these are like and that has always been the case. That is not anything new, right? That has been the case since the beginning of when teenagers started to have more autonomy and have be able to kind of experiment with fashion and how they dress and be into the different kind of music and things. I think the difference now is that we've got the internet, so that is both scary for a lot of parents because those appearance ideals are often more blatant, they're more obvious, and children, young people are often being exposed to these ideas in a much more kind of obvious and like it's really concentrated. It's really kind of like targeted, and often at a younger and younger age. And I think a lot of parents are frightened by that because it's not, we're like, we didn't grow up with these technologies necessarily. But I would say that the other way to think about it is that actually children this is the world that they're growing up in. This technology isn't going anywhere. They are digital natives. Like this is part of their world that they know. And actually, so like with social media, it can be a positive and it can be a negative because social media can be a way for them to find community, connect with their friends, find things that they work out what they think about things, learn about the world around them, find a sense of community, use their voice. These are all like positive, can be really positive ways of using social media. And that also links in with, how we kind of present and show up in the world. I think that it's quite easy as a parent to get scared about, we don't want our children to have to unlearn the stuff that we've gone through. But I think that part of being a teenager is about exploring and also like not even a teenager. So, like that kind of age of like puberty, like 8, 9, 10. It's very natural for kids to want to play dress up and experiment, and like before pre-social media, it would have been like, stealing your mum's makeup maybe out of her, makeup purse or whatever. Like that's all like quite normal behavior for children. They're experimenting, they're playing. I think the difference is now is that it's being done in a much more public forum because we have social media, and that can feel quite scary as parents.
Do you think that there is an age range, I guess, or just an age that you think, or maybe an age group that shouldn't be on social media, or if there is an age in which it's appropriate to discuss like shaving and makeup and all of those types of things, of ways in which, I mean, like for myself, I remember being so stressed of like, Mom, please let me shave. And it's like, no, not allowed to. And I'm like, oh, what? But my legs are hairy. And it's like, oh, but legs have hair. And I also was not allowed to have social media until I was 16. So it's just interesting of, is there actually a good age for these things to take place or to have these conversations?
So I want to put that back to you. So you were saying to your mum that you wanted to like shave your legs or you wanted to have social media, what did that conversation look like? And did you feel hard done by that you weren't allowed to do those things?
Yes, but at least for the shaving, I think I looking back, I don't remember what triggered me to want to shave. Um, but I just remember one day being like, "Mom, I need to shave my legs," and her being like, "No, you're not old enough. Like, you don't need to do that. It's gonna grow back and blah 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 blah." And I'm like, "Oh, but what the heck?" Um, so it's like looking back on it now, I don't fully remember the conversations and the things that were influencing me to want to do that. But I do remember being like upset that I wasn't allowed to. I guess probably my best guess would be my friends were shaving, probably.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I think I don't think that there's like a right or wrong with this stuff. And I know that a lot of people, particularly online, like we're often forced into thinking about things in a really binary way. Like this is the good and this is the bad, this is the right, this is the wrong. For me personally, I think that I believe like really strongly in body autonomy. So I believe that, we should all, our bodies are our own, and it's up to us how we think and feel about our bodies and how we treat our bodies. But within that, often as obviously as parents and caregivers, we have a duty of care to our children that they are safe and that they are treating their bodies like safely. And so I think that when it comes to really what we're talking about here is we're talking about appearance ideals. Yeah, we're talking about kind of beauty standards. So that might look like a conversation with your teen, however old they are, when they start to get body hair, or even before they start getting body hair. Like, um, okay, that's interesting that you're saying that you want to shave. Let's explore that a bit. Why is that? When we in Western culture, we have often been encouraged to shave and lose our body hair. And did you know that that was actually that whole appearance ideal, that whole beauty standard was created by companies wanting to sell us razors? And actually, when you go into like the history of some of these beauty ideals and the context behind it, that can be quite an interesting start into a conversation. However, I think we also need to be aware that we can talk to kids about this stuff and help them understand like where these ideas come from. But it's also then saying, I think it's absolutely natural that you would want to shave your legs or your armpit hair if you're getting changed for PE or sport or whatever, and everyone else in the changing room has got rid of their body hair and you feel like, it makes you feel different. It's not unusual that you might feel that you can't like push back against that beauty ideal. And so maybe that's an opportunity for a parent to say how they feel. So like for me, for example, I shave my armpits and I've always shaved my armpits. And when my my elder daughter anyway, started to develop body hair, we had a whole conversation about, this is what some people do. There is a standard here, there's a beauty standard. People feel pressure to do this. Actually, it's silly, really, when you think about like the history of it. We shouldn't feel this pressure, but this pressure does exist, and we're all products of the culture that we're in. So that is not to say that there's like a right or wrong way to do it, but I think that often I think it's helping children realize that although there is a choice there, like you're choosing to shave or not shave your armpits, that choice is made in a context, a cultural context, yeah. And so actually, it might feel like it's a choice to shave your armpits, and I'm doing this thing because it's an empowering thing. I'm shaving my armpits for me because I want to do it. Actually, that choice is being made in a context where everyone else is doing it, and we're told that actually we learn from a really early age that actually it's about hygiene and whatever. And actually, though, that is all, those are all marketing tactics to make us buy the products. So I think, saying, if you decide to shave your armpits or shave your legs or whatever it is, that decision is being made in, because of lots of other pressures and all of these other things. And what you need to understand is that you don't need to do this stuff in order to keep your body clean. You don't have to have like hairless armpits to be clean. It's not a hygiene thing. It's an appearance thing. It's a beauty standard. And you don't have, there is a, you don't have to adhere to it. You can choose not to. And I don't know, for me, I think that these conversations should really be happening when children's bodies, like before they've even changed, really, because the worst thing would be that a child, their body starts changing, they're not aware of the changes that their body's going through. They maybe don't feel comfortable to like raise it with their parents. They feel embarrassed, they feel shame. They maybe steal their mum's razor or whatever and they try and shave and they don't know how to do it, and it's dangerous, and like these are all things that we don't want to happen. So like having that conversation, and starting to kind of, whether that is through like books, or whether that's through YouTube videos on this subject, like whatever it is that can get your child to connect. But really we want to start be having these conversations before their bodies start changing, to prepare them.
Yeah, I feel like having those conversations as their bodies are changing or even right after they've changed, it could almost maybe feel like there's more pressure, like it's more urgent for those things to happen. But I feel like this is a perfect time to remind everyone, like, you were not born being insecure about your body. You weren't born being insecure. Your insecurities, there were so many people who profit off of it. Your body is not the problem. I have three older brothers, and I have found it interesting their viewpoints on different things. I remember I was shopping once with one of my brothers. We were at Bed Bath and Beyond, I think, and I was like, "Oh, I want to try and find this thing that like removes hair from my body." And my brother's like, I don't understand what's up with women trying to remove hair that's just gonna grow back. I'm like, oh, like he's like, maybe it's just supposed to be there if it's just gonna keep growing back. And then my oldest brother, I must have been in elementary school, probably, possibly. And I had brought up how girls wanted to have a thigh gap. And he's like, "What do you mean you want a thigh gap? Like, I've never had a thigh gap," and stuff like that. And it's just interesting how these insecurities and these things that we grow up worrying about, that there's, at least in my scenario, my brothers were like, "What are you talking about?" Do you find that there is a difference when you're in schools teaching about body image for how the girls receive it and how the guys receive it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think, well, all the evidence shows that boys are catching up to girls in terms of worrying about their body and worrying about the way they look, but maybe those pressures are slightly different. So, we know, for example, that lots of boys are now worrying that they don't have big enough muscles, or they're wanting to look like their favorite like fitness influencer. There's also a whole thing going on with like misogyny content online, so misogyny influences, and like really perpetuating this idea of what it is to be a man, and therefore if you are like upholding that masculine ideal, you have to look a certain way. And so all of the and also actually when I was growing up in the 90s, a lot of the brands that would like the makeup brands and the skincare brands and the beauty brands that were targeting women, they only had like a women's line, but now most of these brands have a line for men and boys as well. So that is definitely a segment of the market that they are like trying to cut into. Um, and then obviously we've got, I've talked about influencers, but we've obviously got the influence of like reality television and, I don't know if you have like Love Island over there, but like Love Island is really big over here, or at least it used to be anyway. And all of these things are really kind of teaching men and young boys that their value is in their appearance, that we can tell how worthy and important and good a man, boy, whatever they are based on their appearance. um and actually also within like LGBTQIA plus communities, we know that like appearance ideals and beauty standards are there as well, like they're everywhere. I think the thing, what we find when we go into schools is it's often in schools like there's this idea that body image, or from the parents, from the adult point of view, from like teachers point of view or parents, is that there's still this idea exists that body image is like a woman and girls issue, and it's this almost frivolous fluffy thing that really only impacts girls and is less of a concern for boys. And actually, if we want to raise like empowered young girls, we need to raise empowered young girls who can kind of push back against some of these standards. But actually, I think that we need to know that boys suffer with this stuff too, but also regardless of whether a child is experiencing these struggles themselves, I think it's really important to give young people a space to have these conversations together so they can hear that how different people, experience this stuff, and the pressures that they feel. Because I think that often what happens is like girls can be like so caught up in their bubble of this is how I should look, and this is how I should act, and actually the way I look is really important. And the boys aren't aware of how the girls are feeling, and the girls aren't necessarily aware of how the boys are feeling. And then what if you don't identify with the gender that you were given at birth? Like where do you fit into all of that as well? So I think that I feel really strongly that if it's a mixed sex school, that actually we shouldn't be separating girls and boys. Like if we're teaching a class on body image, that class should be together, and we should have like small groups where we've got we're not separating the genders of the children. They should be having these conversations together and hearing how they're experiencing it. And I think the other thing is, like in the UK anyway, like we have sex education. So children learn about puberty and they learn about body changes. And again, I think that, my second book, which is for readers age 9 plus, has a whole chapter about puberty. And within that chapter, we talk about like periods and wet dreams and body hair and all of the like really normal things that happen to our bodies, the weird and wonderful things that happen to our bodies, like as we're going through puberty. And in that chapter, I specifically say, like, doesn't matter whether these body changes, that I'm talking about right now in this paragraph apply to you or not. I think it's important that you are aware that they happen, because it's good that we all know how we, our bodies change and how our body, the things that we're going through. Like that's just a kind of thing of empathy, right? Like I feel really strongly that it shouldn't just be girls who learn about periods, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that in terms of our experience when we're going into schools, I think that there is definitely sometimes there is a disconnect there. Sometimes teachers aren't aware that this is a boy issue too. Um, but definitely when young people are talking to us, we know that this is definitely not just something that impacts girls. And I think also these kind of like pressures that we're feeling, whether it's you talked about, the pressure to feel like you should have a thigh gap or like hairy legs or whatever. I think that a child who doesn't feel that pressure, it's good for them to be aware that other people do and why, because it's not, I think that it's not like a moral failing if you do feel that way. I think that the other thing that can happen is that, and this also happens in like body positive, like parenting spheres, is that there's almost this kind of moralistic kind of like almost like a hierarchy thing going on whereby you feel like a bad parent if your kid is suffering with this stuff because somehow you must have given them these ideas, or you feel like a bad person if you're experiencing these emotions. And actually, I would say, like, you're not a bad parent and you're not a bad person. You're just a product of the culture that we live in. And it's not, it's not, you don't win brownie points or some kind of special certificate if you haven't ever experienced these feelings. And being aware that people do and how many people do is actually could make you like a better parent and a better friend as well. Whether if you're a young person, okay, great. I'm really pleased for you that you've never, that you've never experienced this and that you would never be silly enough to fall for some of these like tricks that are making you feel bad about your body. Like that's great that you can think critically about this, but it doesn't mean that you're a better person or that anyone around you is like morally failed if they are struggling with it.
I appreciate you saying that so much because I think it is easy to feel defensive or like even when we're doing all these health things and we think we're doing it for our health, it's like if someone starts questioning how we're doing things, it's really easy to be like, whoa, no, like I'm not doing anything wrong. Like what I'm sharing is good. It's like, I'm so sorry for everyone that I recommended you step on a scale. But it's like when you know better, you can then do better. And it's like giving yourself the grace that we've all grown up with crazy beauty standards and just a society that again profits off of our insecurities. So you're not crazy or broken, but it's what can you start doing now and that it's never too late. So I really appreciate you sharing that. So one of the things that I think a lot of parents or even just loved ones in general maybe struggle with or have like there's so much noise online on social media, what we're getting taught in schools that it's like how are we supposed to know what is the right amount of exercise for a young one? And how do you go about fueling and helping them nourish their bodies properly for exercise without it being diety?
Sure. Okay. So I will caveat with this with the fact that I'm not a dietitian and I'm not a nutritionist, but yeah, we have eating disorder dietitian on our team and we have nutritionists in our team. One thing that I would say is that I think that generally we need to kind of trust our kids' bodies. We need to kind of get comfortable with trusting our kids' bodies that they are doing what they're meant to be doing. And that means kind of that actually it's so one thing that can be really useful for parents to remember is it's really common for kids to gain weight before they go through puberty. And that can be particularly if parents are dealing with a bit of like internalized fat phobia themselves, that or that maybe they've experienced weight stigma themselves and they want to protect their kids from experiencing anti-fat bias, as they're growing up. That can be like a scary thing. And they can start feeling like, oh, I need to like police my child's body, right? But actually, generally, kids' bodies know what they need and they know what they're meant to be doing. And one of the biggest things that we can do as parents is to trust our kids' bodies. And so when we're thinking about like, well, what does my kid need to like fuel their body and what should they be eating? Like, actually, we don't need to be like using meal plans and working out like how many calories they're consuming and like making sure that they're getting like X amount of steps in a day, because that is diet culture. Like that trying to put a measurement on it, like that is like one of the most like obvious forms of diet culture. Like, actually, moving our bodies and moving in a way that feels good and recognizing that all different types of movement are valid, is good for all of us, good for children and adults. Most children will generally enjoy moving their bodies in some way. So, like, if you walk past a playground at lunchtime, when the kids are all out, playing, I think they call it like recess in America.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
So, like, when they're all out there at playtime, like it's really, I've never walked past or gone into a school at playtime and the kids are like just standing around or even like doing planks or something. Like they're running around, playing, dancing around, like moving their bodies. Like anyone who has contact with children will know that often children will walk and will run and jump and skip and hop when they could just walk, like they often will just kind of want to move their bodies. And that all is valid. We don't have to be thinking about the amount of exercise that a child's getting in terms of that kind of formal exercise or organized sport. Going to the park, walking to school, walking home from school, playing at playtime, like these are all valid forms of movement. It's also very normal, I would say, to have different periods of our year when we're moving our body in different ways. So, like here in the UK, it gets dark now at the moment at like 4:30. So we are naturally probably like not moving as much and not being outside as much as we would in the summer. When I go on holiday with my family, we're out on our bikes, we're swimming, we go camping, so we're outside. We're walking a lot more because you even just like walk to the toilet, you have to walk all the way to like the wash blocks. That means that we're probably more active in those months of the year than we are like now, because we're in a dark period in the UK where it's literally dark. Um, and so I think that kind of just getting comfortable with that and just being a bit more relaxed about it. And I think with children, it's giving them, and there's a huge amount of privilege involved in this as well. It's giving them access to move their body in a way that feels fun and feels good. And what does that look like? What do you enjoy doing? Do you like dancing? Do you like playing sport? If you don't, that's okay. There are different ways that we can move our body. And even like moving away from this idea of saying that it's something we should be doing to be healthy, because actually, like it's something that we can do. It's something that it can be fun. Like, let's think about it in terms of playing and just kind of bonding and being together as a family, maybe, rather than being, oh, this is something that we should do because we have to do it to be healthy. Like, as soon as we start putting rules around movement, exercise, food, like that's when we can start to get into problematic, tricky territory.
It just makes me so happy and excited that younger humans are going to be learning this earlier on than like when all of us did. Because it doesn't have to be something that you learn when you're 25, 30, 40, 50. I actually did a certification program, and the teacher of it was saying that he had clients that they were in their 70s and 80s and still struggling with these ideals. So the idea that we can help younger humans not go through this is very exciting. And the idea that movement can be fun. Like, let's just take a moment. Movement can be fun. It should not be a punishment. It should not be painful. It should be fun and it can feel good. And that's when it's going to be the healthiest for you. It's not when you're punishing yourself with it and you can't like move the next day. The healthiest is when you're having fun and it just feels good.
We want to raise children who have a long-term, healthy, and consistent relationship with movement and food. And that means, losing some of the rules around food and just kind of allowing them to be in their bodies and work out what feels good in their bodies.
Mm-hmm. The last main question I have for you is how can we approach other family members making comments about like either your kids or whoever even when it's like good intentioned and like it's not negative, but it's just a body comment and you're not around, like how can you mitigate those comments being made?
It's really hard, isn't it? And again, I don't think that there's a right or a wrong way. I know that there's a genre, a niche of content online where these kind of posts always are really popular, where people will share like scripts and like a scripted example of like, do this if someone comments on your kid's body, or this is the script you can use. But real life isn't a script. Like we're not working from a script. And I think that there are different situations where different approaches might be more valid. And also within that, depending on your level of body privilege yourself and your past experience and your relation and your the kind of relationship that you have with that person, all of that is going to inform how you manage it as well. So I guess there are like three like potential scenarios that we could think of. The first is, maybe it's a scenario where this is a person, a friend or a relative that you're close to, that you have a good, safe relationship with, and they are curious and inquisitive and open to learning new things, but they just haven't learned this stuff yet. So if they're in that space, like maybe if they do make a comment, or you think that they might make a comment, or even before they've even made a comment, you could start sharing some of the things that you're learning with them and having conversations about it. And if then they start making body comments, like that's when you can start to say, oh, do you remember we talked about, and how I've been learning about this, and I know that it's really easy to fall into like this habit of making these comments because the culture that we live in. But actually, can we just like try not to do that, And um, like for me, like my family know that anything that comes up where they're going to be like making, a comment or saying something, like I will call them out on it. I will say like, oh, and sometimes that's like a joke. It almost like, oh, Molly, like they'll almost like say it to like, it's like a provocation. And sometimes it will just be me. It'll just say, well, look, we just don't speak about bodies in that way in this house. And, we don't use the word fat as an insult. Fat is a neutral, descriptive word. And actually, all bodies are good bodies. And we don't comment on people's bodies in this house and, whatever it is. There's another also thing to think about, is that it might be someone that you don't know so well. It might be someone that you don't have that close kind of relationship where you can have those kind of open conversations. And so if in that situation, if you know that you're going to be around this person and you can't not be around them, for whatever reason, or you don't feel that you can not be around them, you could think about how you're going to prepare your kids, for that interaction. So it might be kind of saying to your kids beforehand, oh, hey, that, in our family, we believe that all bodies are good bodies. And we believe that all foods fit, and that we don't comment on what other people are eating, and we don't comment on other people's bodies. Well, when we see whoever it is later on, they don't always believe those things. They're still doing it the old way. They haven't learned about this new way of doing things and the new ideas that we know about. So just be mindful of that. If they make comments, it's that's not what we believe as a family. And just kind of prepare them for that. Sometimes that can work. And then there might be situations where, again, like depending on your own body privilege, your own experiences, if your child is sick, it's really struggling with like food and eating, there might be some situations where you need to think, is it safe for my kid to be around this person at the moment? Like actually, like, if my kid is struggling with this stuff, like, is this a safe space for them to be in, And I think that that is like a hard thing to have to think about. But again, like one of our jobs as parents is to like keep our kids safe. And I'm not saying that we should wrap our kids in cotton wool and never allow them to experience the world, because I think that also it's really important that kids do know that these attitudes exist out in the wider world, even if they don't exist at home, because it can help them build tools and resilience and think critically about these messages. But if your kid is going to be in a situation where you feel that their own body is going to be torn apart, commented on, and their mental health is going to be suffering because of this person, and this person is effectively going to bully them. I don't know. Is that person, is that someone that you want to be around your kid? That's the
I
question. You
I
know,
think that is so powerful. And I think it's something that even us as adults, we don't even stop to think that we have a say in not going around those people who would bully us in our bodies. That's like sometimes they're still doing that, even though you're an adult now, that it's like, no, you have a say and you also have a say for the younger human in your life. So I think that's really powerful.
yeah. And I think that's also an example of body advocacy, right? Like we talk at the Body Happy organization about how we're trying to help schools build classroom cultures of body respect. And we want them to, part of that is learning about body advocacy. So how do we show up for people who maybe their experiences of living in their body are different to ours? Maybe they have less body privilege, maybe they're more marginalized, or maybe they're having just a tougher time. So how can we advocate for these people? How can we advocate for, other people in our life? And so part of that is having boundaries, and boundaries are more than just talking about boundaries on social media and like saying no. Like boundaries sometimes mean like having making difficult decisions about who is safe for your kid to be near, or how much time you want your kid to be exposed to that person, you know?
This has been so amazing, so helpful. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day so much to be here with us. I have two quick questions to wrap up this episode. The first one is, what do you wish you could go back and tell younger Molly?
Oh my gosh. Like it's such a cliche, but I wish that I could go back, and I still have to tell myself this now, like regularly, that like actually to kind of focus on how far I've come and the wins, and know that I'm doing an okay job, I'm enough. I don't need to, it's not about like what I look like. My worth is not also tied to like my productivity or what grade I get at school or how much I earn or whatever. Like me as a human being on this planet am enough as I am, and to really kind of focus on the things, like celebrate the wins a bit more than focus on the things that I still have to do or the things that I think I should improve, and I think that that is an ongoing, that is like what little me needed to know, but it's also what me now as a 41-year-old woman needs to remember, and it's, yeah, it's an ongoing work in progress.
I love that. The second question is, what advice would you give to someone who is just starting out trying to learn to love their body more?
Give yourself compassion, like hefty doses of compassion and grace, and recognize that you've lived, probably a long time absorbing these messages. You're not just going to unlearn them overnight. And the, the great thing about body image is that it isn't this linear thing. It can go up and down. And, it's not something that you get a gold star at the end, that you like reach the end of your quote unquote body image journey and suddenly you feel fabulous and you're always going to feel like that. Actually, our bodies change throughout our lives and our body image can change too. That doesn't mean that we have to accept when we feel bad that like that's just how we're going to feel. But actually, it means that when we have those kind of tools that you'll be learning about now um, at hand, and we start to challenge these ideas, it gives us a better place to come back from. So I think that just be really kind of, and again, it's a massive cliche, but just be like, try and be really kind to yourself as you're going through this process. And also, there is nowadays, that there's a huge pressure on people to look a certain way, but I feel increasingly there's a huge pressure on people to to appear like they feel a certain way about their body. So, you're failing if you don't look right, but you're also failing if you feel bad about your body. You're not body positive, you're not body positive, you don't have positive body image, so therefore you failed. And actually, like, I don't think that that's a useful or helpful place to be either. Um, body image is not this linear thing. It takes compassion, it takes time. Give yourself time, and just like don't stop challenging some of these messages that might make you feel like you're not good enough just exactly as you are.
I already know I'm going to be listening to this multiple times. That is so good. Um, for those listening, how can they get in touch with you? I know you have some books. I will link those in the show notes. What is the best way for them to connect with you and work with you?
Yeah, if you check out all of the resources and work that we have to offer, including yeah, downloadable resources for schools, resources for families around body image, bodyhappyorg.com. So bodyhappyorg.com, that's the name of the nonprofit that I run. We're based here in the UK, but you can access our resources wherever you are. I am on Instagram at Molly J Forbes, Molly with a Y, J Forbes. And also Body Happy Org is in all the places as well. So at Body Happy Org. And I would say probably email is best. I'm not very good on DMs and I can't always guarantee a response. But yeah, if you want to work with us at Body Happy Org or you have questions about resources, etc., pop us an email.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like your books would be pretty amazing as stocking stuffers and Christmas gifts this year. So, just FYI, if you need an idea, I think these books would be amazing. And you have one for adults and one for children, correct?
Yeah, so Everybody came out this year, published by Puffin for age 9 plus. And then Body Happy Kids is my first book, and that is for adults. Yeah, how to help children and teens love the skin they're in.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Thank you again so much for being here with us today. And until next time, your body is not the problem.